In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord, as we dive into your word again this morning, and we do it with expectant faith. We ask you, Father, to send your Spirit to help us to discern what it is you want us to lift out of these pages, this message, and to give us the spiritual ability and energy, the grace, to plant it deep in our hearts. We ask you to let it be part of our worship of you this day, this Lord's Day, and help it to enrich our lives and enable us to serve you better. In Christ's name I pray. Amen. Amen. Best I can remember, we were at around chapter 6. We really got into it a little bit. Well, let's back up and do it again, because I think it's one of those places that's very practical and instructive for us if we can interpret it that way and not just look at it as an ancient story that happened long ago that doesn't really have any relevance to us. It begins, and God said to Moses, I am the Lord. I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and to Jacob as God Almighty, or El Shaddai. But that wasn't his name. I appeared to them under that title. But by my name, the Lord, Yahweh, I did not make myself known to them. That's to you, Moses. I also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, the land in which they dwelt as sojourners. We've touched on this before, and I think it's probably apparent to everyone here that the story of salvation really can be looked at as series unfolding of covenants, right? So God is pointing out to Moses, I have done that, and now I'm taking it to the next level with you, Moses. So he had a covenant with Adam. He had a covenant with Noah. He had a covenant with Abraham, right? But now he's going to have a covenant with not just with Moses, but with the whole people, right? So you can see this idea of God saving the world by inviting us all back into relationship with Him as family, as being a broader and broader and broader stroke. Because Adam, Noah, and Abraham were all single men, right? Just a person. And God did promise that your descendants would receive a blessing from me, but now He's going to upgrade that promise into a covenant with not just Moses, as I said, but the whole people. The whole tribe, the whole family. He's not going to be done here either. Because later on he's going to have a covenant with David, but then ultimately the greatest covenant of them all, the one that all the others are pointing to and leading to, is the new covenant, the new and everlasting covenant, right? The blood of the sacrifice will be the blood of the Lamb of God, Jesus Christ. The high priest will be the perfect high priest finally, which is Jesus Christ. And the perfect prophet, mediator of it, will also be Jesus Christ. And in that final covenant, the full onslaught, the full gamut, scope of God's plan will be made evident. It's going to be not just the whole tribe of Israel, but all the people, all the nations of the world, everybody. It's going to be the church. All right, so this is a very important stage in this plan, in our story. So I established my covenant with them. Moreover, I have heard the groaning of the sons of Israel, whom the Egyptians hold in bondage, and I have remembered my covenant. He never forgot it, but he's saying, I know about it, and now it's time for me to go forward with it. Say therefore to the sons of Israel, I am the Lord, and I am Yahweh. Remember, they're putting the word Lord in there because they didn't want to write the name. I am Yahweh, and I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians, and I will deliver you from their bondage, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great acts of judgment. And I will take you for my people, and I will be your God, and you shall know that I am the Lord, your God, who has brought you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. Can you see our own story in that line? Those couple of lines right there. These are going to be, this is a prototype, a microcosm, a small rendition of God's plan to redeem the world. Okay? Redeem. Buy back, but it's more than that. The Navarre Study Bible had a nice little... Here it says, for the first time, a key word in salvation history is used. Redemption. A redeemer, in Hebrew the word is goel, was the person who, for reasons of blood relationships, had an obligation to reassert the infringed rights of an offended family member. Be it getting him out of bondage, or recovering some stolen property that's been taken unjustly, or ensuring that reprisals and justice are done if harm has been done to them. By taking this role of redeemer, God is committing himself to wipe out any injustices against the people. He's saying, you are my people, and I'm going to be your redeemer. I'm going to be the advocate that's going to come in and rescue you and make it all right. In the first instance, setting Israel free from the bondage of slavery as a symbol of liberation from the deeper bondage of sin, the devil, and death. God is commenting that you people are my family. So when we say Jesus is our Redeemer, we make the same thing, right? Jesus, our elder brother, has come to rescue us, to make it right, to translate us out of bondage from, in our case, slavery to sin and death, the kingdom of the devil, and to make it right. And he says, and I will bring you into the land. For us, that's the kingdom of God. Ultimately, it's heaven, right? The new Eden. I will bring you, Moses, and the people into the land which I swore to give to Abraham, back in Genesis 15, to Isaac and to Jacob. I will give it to you for a possession. I am the Lord. I am Yahweh. Moses spoke thus to the sons of Israel, but they did not listen to Moses because their spirits were broken because of their cruel bondage. Maybe they had given up hope. But that didn't deter God, because he's speaking in terms of covenant, right? Covenant's important. Again, the Navarre points out a covenant is different from human contractual agreement. It says, in the divine covenant, things are different. God and only He is the one who takes the initiative. These people are not brave enough to step forward. They're not saying, lead on, we'll follow you, or we believe everything you say, right? They're not. It just says here, they're broken, they're beat, right? He is the one who takes the initiative. The people, and only they, derive benefit. God's getting nothing out of this. Okay? God always does whatever He commits Himself to do in the covenant, even when the people break its main commandment, which is to follow Him. The covenant is therefore that act which best reveals God's unconditional love. Not loving because what you can do in return from me. Unconditional love. That's the basis of covenant. First to the chosen people, yes, and later to all people who in Christ share in the new and eternal covenant. So once again, please see in these words what God is saying to Moses and the people, what God is saying to us in the fulfilled version of this. A lot of times we're broken. A lot of times we're maybe beyond hope. A lot of times we're to the point that we're saying, I've messed up so bad, or things have gotten so terrible that I'm beyond redemption. God say, no. You and I are in a covenant. With our baptisms, we are in covenant. And God says, and I'm true to my covenant. It's unconditional. Whether you return my love or not, I'm going to love you to the end. Okay? The Lord said to Moses, go in, tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to let the sons of Israel go out of his land. But Moses said to the Lord, behold, the sons of Israel have not listened to me. How then shall Pharaoh listen to me, who am a man of uncircumcised lips? Remember, he had a speech impediment of some sort. But the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron and gave them a charge to the sons of Israel and to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to bring the sons of Israel out of the land of Egypt. We now here have the genealogy of Moses and Aaron, which I'm not going to read. It's a lot of names, and the end result is that when you get to verse 25, it's to let us know that Aaron, Moses' older brother, and he were Levites. That's the point here. You remember the 12 tribes of Israel, one of them was Levi, and his descendants are Levites. And that's going to be important for us to know, especially in a couple of chapters. Moses and Aaron, that was their tribe. Okay? The Levites.
Sons of Amram?
Huh?
Sons of Amram?
Amram. He is one of, Amram is a descendant of Levi, yes. One of many. He's right in the middle of that story, around verse 17. No, 18. Well, you can go back through them if you want to.
No.
But I don't know enough to tell you anything except I can try to stumble through their names. All right. Verse 26. These are the Aaron and Moses to whom the Lord said, "Bring out the sons of Israel from the land of Egypt by their hosts." It was they who spoke to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, about bringing out the sons of Israel from Egypt, this Moses and this Aaron. Verse 28. On the day when the Lord spoke to Moses in the land of Egypt, all right, here the story is going to be retold again. I told you that the way we believe this came together is sometimes after the Babylonian captivity, the scribes, the priests, the rabbis took the versions that they had and they combined it into the version we have now. And some of those versions were slightly different. But rather than trying to edit it to make them all agree, they just put both versions in there. So we get to here is one of those stories, and this they would say comes from what they call the priestly tradition. Usually if it mentions sacrifices or Levitical laws, liturgy, and things like that, they say that's the priestly tradition. So here, out of that tradition, the story is going to be put side by side, and we're going to hear some of it again with some additional details, or maybe some that are not mentioned that were before. So chapter 7, listen to me. And the Lord said to Moses, "See, I make you as God to Pharaoh, and Aaron your brother shall be your prophet. You shall speak all that I command you, and Aaron your brother shall tell Pharaoh to let the sons of Israel go out of his land. But I will harden Pharaoh's heart. I'm going to give him what his arrogant, prideful heart wants. Because I'm going to use that for my glory. I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and though I multiply my signs and wonders in the land of Egypt, Pharaoh will not listen to you. And then I will lay my hand upon Egypt and bring forth my hosts, my people, the sons of Israel, out of the land of Egypt by great acts of judgments. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord." The Egyptians shall know who God is. This revelation that God is giving to Moses and the people is intended to be a universal message. Everyone's going to know that the God of the Hebrews is God. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, when I stretch forth my hand from Egypt and bring out the sons of Israel from among them. And Moses and Aaron did so. They did as the Lord commanded them. Now Moses was 80 years old, and Aaron was 83. But they're just getting started. They're young at heart. Verse 8. And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "When Pharaoh says to you, 'Prove yourselves by working a miracle,' then you shall say to Aaron, 'Take your rod and cast it down before Pharaoh.'" So I guess Aaron's rod is going to be empowered too. Before it was Moses, remember? Picked it down, turned into a snake. Moses ran away and got to pick it back up. All right. So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and did as the Lord commanded. Aaron cast down his rod before Pharaoh and his servants, and it became a serpent. Then Pharaoh summoned the wise men and the sorcerers. He had court magicians or something. And they also, the magicians of Egypt, did the same act by their secret arts. Were they just able to do the trick, or did they have sort of dark powers? Sorcerers. You know, there's real power in demonic activity. That's the attraction, I think, in our modern time to Wiccan and that sort of Satanism. Because there is a certain amount of gee whiz power associated with it. But we're going to learn it's very limited compared to God. Then Pharaoh summoned the wise men and the sorcerers, and they also, the magicians of Egypt, did the same by their secret arts. For every man cast down his rod, and they became serpents. But Aaron's rod swallowed up their rods.
Let me show you something.
Yeah. Still Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he would not listen to them. So all of these signs, including the plagues, and including even this first sign, really, and I'm thinking the next page, at the bottom of the page, they have a nice list of them, though it doesn't mention the cobra goddess, which was in play here. God is going to show through these signs, you have your gods, and they have their signs and symbols, and maybe there's certain limited power, but God is going to show He is infinitely greater in authority and power over all of them. That's a good insight that our commentary brings out. In every one of these plagues, God is also showing His domination over what they recognize as a God, when in fact they're either preposterous or just demons. And they have no way can stand up to the power of Yahweh. All right, and Edjo, by the way, cobra goddess. So if these snakes were cobras, yuck. And they threw it down and said, behold the power of Edjo, or whatever. And God says, oh yeah? And his snake turns around and eats all the little Edjo cobras. But it wasn't enough to impress Pharaoh enough to break his heart. His heart was hardened, and he would not listen. Then the Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh's heart is hardened. He refuses to let the people go. Go to Pharaoh in the morning as he is going to the water. Wait for him by the river's brink. And take in your hand the rod which was turned into a serpent. And you shall say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, sent me to you, saying, let my people go, that they may serve me in the wilderness. And behold, you have not yet obeyed. Thus says the Lord, by this you shall know that I am the Lord. Behold, I will strike the water that is in the Nile with the rod that is in my hand, and it shall be turned to blood. And the fish of the Nile shall die, and the Nile shall become foul, and the Egyptians will loathe to drink water from the Nile. And the Lord said to Moses, say to Aaron, take your rod, stretch out your hand over the waters of Egypt, over their rivers, their canals, and their ponds, and all their pools of water, that they may become blood. And there shall be blood throughout all the land of Egypt, both in the vessels of wood and in the vessels of stone. Very appropriate, don't you think, that the Nile is going to be turned into blood? Because how were they using the Nile? Well, one of the ways they were using the Nile in regard to the Hebrew babies. They were killing them, right? They were taking the newborn males and throwing them into the Nile. So they were using the Nile as an instrument of death, among other things. So this is very appropriate. The Nile god down there at the bottom is Hapi. Hapi. I'm just going to briefly go through all the rest of these plagues, okay, without reading it. The first three are basically nuisances. And by the way, the magicians are able to duplicate the first two. Well, by the time they get to the third, the plague of all the gnats, I know it's still a nuisance, but it's still a pretty ooky one, right? Well, the magicians can't duplicate that. When we get to chapter 8, verse 19, the magicians said to Pharaoh about the gnats, they tried, but they could not. This is the finger of God. So the sorcerers have now come to believe. We're going to see as these plagues go forward, the members of Pharaoh's court, here first the sorcerers, and then other members of the court, and finally people all over Egypt, they all come to believe. They're basically saying, let them go. We don't have the horsepower to withstand this God of theirs, right? In the end, it's Pharaoh alone, really. All right, so we had the first three are plagues. The next four affect people and their property more seriously. The ninth one is a deep darkness. It's going to be darkness for 3 days. And then the 10th is a terrible loss, where the death of the firstborn. And they did not identify in our footnotes here a god for the gnats, and I didn't bother to go try to find one for you. You don't need to know the name of a bunch of false gods and demons anyway, but they list them over here. One for each one of these. Very important to know is Apis. That's the bull god. Apis, a very powerful symbol, virility and strength. The Canaanites also had a bull god, and that was Baal. Baal worship was the worship of a bull. Okay, and I'm pointing that one out because the Israelites, remember when they wanted to make their own god because Moses and his God had failed them from coming back down the mountain, they made a golden calf. That's a bull. So Scott Hahn says God had gotten the people out of Egypt, but he had not yet got Egypt out of the people. So when they thought they had to revert to plan B, they went back and said, well, we know about a powerful God. Maybe he can save us now. And so they made a golden calf. Okay. I think that's in verse 25 of chapter 8. Pharaoh begins to come along a little bit after the fourth plague, which was the swarm of flies. Your translation may say gadflies, or it may even say horse flies.
Mine just says flies.
Just flies? All right, well, so anyway, any of those are legit. And they were all over Egypt except in the land of Goshen. All of these plagues affected everything except the land that the Israelites lived in. But in verse 25, after the flies, it says, then Pharaoh called Moses and Aaron and said, go sacrifice to your God within the land. All right, he's trying to compromise. All right, you can have your festival, but don't go anywhere. Have it right here in Egypt, in Goshen. Moses said, we can't do that because what we're going to sacrifice will be abominable to the Egyptians, he says, because they're going to sacrifice animals that the Egyptians considered sacred, sheep and goats and bulls, right? Plus, it's not what God told them to do. He says, if we sacrifice offerings abominable to the Egyptians before their eyes, will they not stone us? We must go 3 days' journey into the wilderness and sacrifice to the Lord our God, as he will command us. So Pharaoh says, I will let you go, but don't go very far. Don't go very far. But then Pharaoh hardened his heart. Moses disagreed again. Then we have the fifth plague, which is the death of livestock. This is an affront. This is challenging God, Apis, the bull god, etc. Then the sixth plague, which is boils. Sekhmet is the false god of, what is he the god of? The goddess of disease control. He failed them. Boils. Yuck. The magicians could not, in chapter 9, verse 11 now, and the magicians could not stand before Moses because of the boils, for the boils were upon the Egyptians, the magicians, and all the Egyptians. Okay? The sorcerers have given up. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart again. Then the seventh plague, thunder and hail. For those that did not take Moses' warning and put their livestock in shelter, it ruined their crops. It killed a lot of their flocks. And there you go. I'm just trying to pick out relevant lines. Many are now believing. In verse 20 of chapter 9, then he who feared the word of the Lord among the servants of Pharaoh made his slaves and cattle flee into the houses. All right, so at least some of them had some of their flock spared because they believed Moses. They're coming around, a lot of them are, okay? And in verse 26, only in the land of Goshen, where the sons of Israel were, there was no hail. Then Pharaoh sent to Moses and Aaron and said to them, verse 27, I have sinned this time, and the Lord is in the right, and I and my people are in the wrong. He says, I will let you go. So he made the hail cease. This would be Nut, the sky goddess. But then he changes his mind. Pharaoh changes his mind again when it stops. But when Pharaoh saw that the rain and the hail, verse 34, and thunder had ceased, he sinned yet again and hardened his hearts, he and his people. The eighth plague is the locusts. Brought the locusts in, they ate what was left of the crops, and probably were also nasty. They were in everything, all over everything. Locusts. Verse 7, Pharaoh's servant said to him, "How long shall this man be a snare to us? Let him go, that they may serve their Lord. Do you not yet understand that Egypt is ruined?" So Moses and Aaron were brought back to Pharaoh. And he said, "Go, serve the Lord your God. But who are to go?" Moses said, "We will go with our young and our old, our sons and our daughters, our flocks and our herds." But Pharaoh says, "The Lord be with you if ever I let you and your little ones go. Look, you have some evil purpose. No, go, the men among you, and serve the Lord. For that is what you desire." So he said, worship here. Then he'll say, well, the men can go, but leave your women and your children. Then he says, you can take all the people, but leave your flocks. And Moses is saying, I've told you the terms. I told you what it's going to be. I don't have the authority to change the contract anyway. Right? So anyway, he sent the locusts. Pharaoh changes his mind again. Chapter 10, verse 16. Then Pharaoh called Moses and Aaron and said, "I have sinned against the Lord your God and against you." Yes, you have. "Now therefore forgive my sin, I beg you, only this once, and entreat the Lord your God only to remove this death from me." So he went out from Pharaoh and entreated the Lord. The Lord turned a very strong west wind, which lifted the locusts and drove them into the Red Sea. He's driving the locusts into the Red Sea. Remember, we're trying to figure out which is the Red Sea or the Sea of Reeds that they're going to cross. And it could be the Gulf of Suez. It could be the Gulf of Aqaba. Both are legitimate extensions of the Red Sea. But also all of the water up here was also called Red Sea to them. There's only one lake on our little map, but there's actually a series of lakes. This one's called the Bitter Lake. It has other names. But there are a bunch of lakes here and also a large marshy area. And there were a lot of reeds, especially in the shallow waters. So drove all the locusts where? It doesn't look like they drove them all the way to the Gulf of Aqaba. No. So I think here maybe we're talking about this series of water, right? So the lakes and maybe the Gulf of Suez, I'm not sure. But anyway, the wind blew all the locusts out. Not a single locust was left in all the country of Egypt. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the children go. Now we have this very serious ninth plague. The original 3 days of darkness. A heavy darkness. Why is this serious? Because one of their greatest gods was Ra, the sun god. Pharaoh identified with Ra. Pharaoh kind of also identified himself as a sun god. In fact, Pharaoh considered himself the greatest of all of these gods, right? So we're getting to him. So now he's going to challenge Ra. And Ra, this sun god, can't even thwart my hand, the Lord says. I'll snuff out the sun if I wish to. I'll do it for 3 days. Is it a great eclipse? I don't know. 3 days, deep darkness. But there was light in the land of Goshen. It pays to be part of the people of God. I take great heart in that, by the way. Darkness everywhere. But there was light in the land of Goshen, where God's people lived. Verse 24 of chapter 10. Then Pharaoh called Moses and said, "Go, serve the Lord. Your children also may go with you. Only let your flocks and your herds remain." In other words, your wealth and your possessions. Moses said, "No. You must also let us have sacrifices and burnt offerings, that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. Our cattle also must go with us. Not a hoof shall be left behind. for we must take of them to serve our God. And we do not know with what we must serve the Lord until we get there. Is he just trying to make it sound more reasonable? No, there's a reason. We're not up to anything, Pharaoh. Trust me. When we leave with everything we own and all of our people and all our wealth and all of our flocks, we'll probably come back. Pharaoh's not trusting him. He's right. All right. By the way, here on this page in our commentary, and again for our people that watch online, our commentary is the Ignatius Catholic Study Bible. This is the Exodus version. Okay, you can get the entire thing, which is huge, or you can get these individual study guides, which we've been using for a while. So anyway, on page 30 and 31, there's a couple of nice essays where they try to give the pros and cons of the two most popular dates for all these happenings, which I alluded to a little bit, in basically 1250 or 1450, depending on which set of circumstances and evidence you want to cling to. But there's pluses and minuses for both. Archaeologically, it seems to be more like the 1250. They say 1260 BC. According to the biblical text, and where other places in the Bible it mentions this happened, it'd be more like the 1450. They call it 1446 BC. That would be different pharaohs, right? We don't know. I've said before, we have good records now of the history of Egypt, but if they'd mentioned Pharaoh's name even once, we'd have this nailed. But Pharaoh's not mentioned anywhere in this record. By the way, those magicians, did you notice in your footnote that the Jewish tradition from the Mishnah, I think, mentions their names, and then Janus and Jambres, and Paul is going to reference them in 2 Timothy 3:8, mention their names, which is not in the canon of Scripture. This is extra biblical source, right? And that they had that, and they're named in there, that tradition. And Paul uses them as an example to represent everyone who opposes truth, everyone who corrupts the faith. So they get named. Perpetually, they're going to be named as examples of corrupt and faithless enemies of truth. Great. Now we get to the final plague, chapter 11. Moses and Aaron get irritated at each other after all this. Pharaoh says, I don't even want to see your face again. In the last line of chapter 10, Moses says, as you say, I will not see your face again, lest he sees it floating in the Red Sea. Warning of the final plague. Okay, this is where I hoped to get to last week. I didn't, by almost 40 minutes. But let's take a look at it. We are with this final plague and the institution of the Passover, which is going to break open the final deliverance, where the people are going to be not only let go, but they're going to be loaded down with riches. God had told Moses, when you leave, you're going to despoil the Egyptians. Really, they're going to pay you back for all the property that they've taken from you when they enslaved you, right? He predicted that, and that's what's going to happen. And here I'm going to ask you, for any of you that got this CD that I recommended last week, have you listened to it? We have 3 left. $2 US. If you want one. It's only about 30 minutes long, I think.
Closer to an hour.
Oh, is it closer to an hour?
But it is really amazing.
So you recommend it as well. All right. So in it, Dr. Brant Pitre, at the time he did this, he taught theology, or maybe it was scripture, at Notre Dame University. Notre Dame Seminary, excuse me. Notre Dame Seminary. He probably still does, because it's not that old. But in it, it's called Jesus and the Jewish Roots of the Eucharist. And he lifts out of Exodus 3 key types of the Eucharist. And his question in it was, how did the early Christians, who were all Jews, so quickly come to understand the Eucharist, which Jesus gave the church at the Last Supper, to be the real presence of Christ? to be what the church has always said it is. And he says, because they understood their scriptures. That's what he says. And he focuses on three parallels. One is the Passover. The other is the manna, which we haven't quite got to yet. And the third is the bread of presence, which will be later in Exodus. But all those are in Exodus. The bread of presence is when they build the tent of meeting. Sometimes they call it the tabernacle. Inside of it were, you had the ark, which is going to represent God, right? In front of the ark, on the other side of the veil, there was the menorah, the 7 candles on a lampstand, or the 7, maybe they weren't candles. Anyway, what's the word I'm looking for? It was a lampstand. Yeah, it had 7 lamps on it anyway, right? And it was supposed to be kept burning at all times. And then the other thing that was out there was an altar on which were 12 loaves of unleavened bread, the bread of presence. And they were to be baked every week by the Levites, which by the time we get there will be the priests, put out there, and they would sit there all week, and they represented the offering of the people, the 12 tribes, to God. And then he also makes a wonderful, he points out to us that this represents the Holy Trinity. God the Father, the lamp would represent the Holy Spirit, and the bread of life, would represent Jesus Christ. I thought that was pretty cool, right? All right, so he does that. And then a lot in the Passover, which is, the Eucharist, the Last Supper. Eucharist was instituted at the Last Supper, which was a Passover meal. And he points out a lot of interesting things there about what was different, the way Jesus and the apostles celebrated it that night, where he made it the covenant meal of the new covenant. And he points out that one glaring thing that was missing, and the Last Supper is mentioned in all 3 synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. I mean, what happened there. But something's missing that he said the Jews would have recognized. There was no lamb. Where we're going to read in the Passover, it was really centered on the lamb. But if you remember in Mark, I gave you a working understanding of why. Why it was okay for Jesus and the apostles to not have a lamb at their Passover meal. Because nowhere in it does the apostles stand up and say, "Where's the lamb? You forgot the lamb." Right? It's not. Do you remember what I suggested? This is also from Bargill Pixner. The upper room, the apotheosis, was in the Essene quarter. The Essene quarter of Jerusalem, where the Essenes would come to Jerusalem. One place the Essenes did not go at the time of Jesus was the temple. Okay? Because they did not recognize the priesthood as legitimate. And they didn't recognize what happened at the temple as legitimate. But the only place the lamb could be sacrificed was in the temple. So therefore, the Essenes, just like Jews all over the diaspora who could not get to the temple on the day before Passover to have their lamb prepared, they celebrated the Passover without lamb. By and large, unless there's some special exceptions, today when the Jewish people offer the Passover, they don't have lamb. They have unleavened bread and the bitter herbs, which are onions and some other things, right? And they go through, depending on the group, they'll have something very, very similar, but it's more similar really to the Last Supper because there's no lamb. They'll have the wine, and they have... He also goes to he says it's very important at the Passover. They're going to take the instructions here, and forevermore, the very important opening of the Passover, the way it's still celebrated today, is the youngest... And the Passover, by the way, was not celebrated in the temple. It was celebrated in homes. It's just that the lamb was prepared in the temple. Just like John points out, when Jesus died, it was the hour that the lambs were being sacrificed, because in the temple, remember? He makes that correlation too. When John writes his gospel, the last gospel to be written, he lifts a lot of typology out, because he recognizes this. They were preparing lambs in the temple for the Passover at the exact hour that Jesus was dying on the cross. You say, well, I thought the Last Supper was a Passover meal. How could he be dying on the day of preparation? And again, Father Pixner pointed out to us there were 2 calendars. And the Essenes went by the original calendar, not the new calendar, and that put Passover on a day earlier in the same week. So it was perfectly legitimate for Jesus and his followers to offer the Passover earlier in the week. And then the day everyone else was going to have it, he would have been crucified on Friday, the day before the Passover, which was on a Sabbath that year, and that was day of preparation. Am I leaving everybody behind? I'm just pointing all these little things out. John lists these out. John's going to list several of these things out. Let me just let them come to the surface as we get to them, I guess. All right, the final plague. One more plague, he says in chapter 11. In verse 2, speak now in the hearing of the people, that they ask every man of his neighbor and every woman of her neighbor jewelry of silver and gold. And the Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. Moreover, the man Moses was very great in the land of Egypt, in the sight of Pharaoh's servants, and in the sight of the people. So everyone else has got it, right? And they're very happy to give whatever they want if it means they're going to leave. To me, it's a shame that they all had to suffer the consequences of this last plague. The firstborn sons will die. But it wasn't just Pharaoh. It was all the families of Egypt, and even of their livestock, except in the land of Goshen. But the people suffer the consequences of evil rulers. I say that in pause.
But the people didn't, they worship the same God.
Yeah, but they weren't all renouncing their other gods, but they are definitely recognizing these Israelites, his God, their God, he's something, right? Our magicians and our gods can't withstand. He does whatever he wants. He runs right through our God's living room and takes and does whatever he wants. They're seeing that. They're recognizing that. And they've been saying, Pharaoh, let him go. They've ruined the whole country. What is it going to take? Then Moses predicts it, verse 4. Thus says the Lord, about midnight I will go forth in the midst of Egypt, and all the firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die. From the firstborn of Pharaoh, who sits upon his throne, even to the firstborn of the maidservant, who's behind the mill, and all the firstborn of the cattle. The cattle, at least. I think I said all the livestock, but it says cattle. And there probably weren't too many cattle left, I don't think. After the hail and one of the plagues specifically killed most all the cattle. All right. And there shall be a great cry throughout all the land of Egypt, I can only imagine, such as there has never been, nor ever shall be again. But against any of the sons of Israel, either man or beast, not a dog shall growl, that you may know that the Lord makes a distinction between the Egyptians and Israel. And all these your servants shall come down to me and bow down to me, saying, get you out, and all the people who follow you. And after that I will go out. And he went out from Pharaoh in hot anger. And then the Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh will not listen to you, that my wonders may be multiplied in the land. Moses and Aaron did all these wonders before Pharaoh, and the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the sons of Israel go out of his land. Yeah, so Pharaoh went from no way to worship here, to don't go far and only the men, then go, but leave your flocks. Finally he's going to say, go, take everything, get out of here and don't come back. That's where he's going to get to. Before this midnight hour comes and this terrible tragedy occurs, the Passover is instituted. Chapter 12. Such an important moment in the history of salvation. And this Passover is instituted. By the way, I didn't finish the sentence. Dr. Pittry says that when the Passover meal begins, the youngest member of the house says to the oldest member of the house who's presiding, what is different about this night? What makes this night different from every other night? That's the question, right? And the answer should be, because this is the night we remember how God brought me out of the land of Egypt. And he makes a big deal of that. They're not just remembering or representing what happened at the Passover, but they're representing it. They're making it present again. And that's what we say about the Eucharist. What's the word, Larry? Anamnesis? Anamnesis means to make present again. So represent doesn't mean have, some symbol of it. It means to represent. So when we celebrate the Eucharist, we are at the Last Supper. And the Last Supper is best understood as incorporating all of the passion of Jesus Christ up to his very death. So we're not crucifying Jesus again, but in the Eucharist we're making ourselves present again at that. And that again is paralleled in the Passover meal and the way it's structured and the way God told him to celebrate it. So the Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, "This month shall be for you the beginning of months." In that original calendar, that was the first month. In the new calendar, it wasn't. I think beginning of the Jewish year now is somewhere in the fall, Rosh Hashanah. "It shall be the first month of the year for you. Tell all the congregation of Israel that on the 10th month of this day, they shall take every man a lamb according to their father's houses, a lamb for a household. If the household is too small for a lamb, then a man and his neighbor shall combine their numbers. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male a year old." In the spring, where this would have been, that's the time that lambs had been born. So some of them would be 1 year old, right? But he wants one without a blemish. He doesn't want you to take the one you really didn't want, or the one that you had, the ugly one, or the one that you had no intention of breeding anymore. No. He wanted the best. God wants us to sacrifice to him, but he doesn't need it. He doesn't need any of it. He wants us to make sacrifices for our benefit. And it does us the most good if we give him our best. People ask me all the time, we're talking about the tithe, well, is that gross or net? Is that off the top or after taxes? Well, what do you think is offering God your best tenth? Yeah, I have to say so. I mean, it's off the top, isn't it? I mean, that's what the government takes.
And then some.
And then some. Yeah, if you have a 10% tax rate, good on you. Right, but God's saying, no, well, you recognize your obligation to the state. I would like you to recognize your obligation to me. But I see parallels here. But it's not just in money. It's in everything that we offer God. Let's don't see, after I do everything I want, everything I need, what's left, and I'll give him a tip. I'll give him a little bit of what's left. Okay? Right. Not of our time, our talent, whatever. He says, bring a lamb without blemish, a male, a year old. You shall take it from the sheep or from the goats, and you shall keep it until the 14th day of this month. Then the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill their lambs in the evening. Then they shall take some of the blood, put it on the 2 doorposts and the lintel of the house in which they eat. They're going to spread the blood on the wood. And then they're good to go, right? No. Then you shall roast and eat the lamb. Does it make sense to you that if the Eucharist is the covenant meal of the new covenant, we not only recognize Christ offering himself on the cross, but that we eat the lamb? Jesus says, my body is real flesh. My blood is real drink. Again, it's John who recognizes Jesus said that. He's the one that gives us the 6th chapter of John, the bread of life discourse, where Jesus says, you must eat my flesh and drink my blood or you have no life in you. Well, here, if they had spread the blood on the lintel and then just buried the lamb or threw it out or gave it away to their neighbor because they didn't like lamb, in the morning their firstborn was dead. You know, I started thinking in my own family, who's the firstborn? Me, for one. Firstborn male. But I think of my cousins, my father, my uncle. You know, ooh.
Makes a lot of people laugh.
Yeah, right. Of course, most of them already are gone. I'm rapidly becoming the patriarch of my family. Not quite. Go Uncle Joe. But so anyway. Yes. So you mark yourselves with the blood of the Lamb. When are we marked with the blood of the Lamb? At our baptisms, yeah? An indelible mark. We read about it in Revelation. Those who have been marked with the sign of God. The blood of the Lamb. Mark yourselves and then eat the sacrifice. Make it your own. Bring it into yourself. And he says, with bitter herbs and unleavened bread. Unleavened bread. What does unleavened bread mean? That's pita bread, we call it, right? It means bread that has not had yeast added to it. And that this is going to symbolize to them that they left in such a hurry that when they made their dough, they didn't have time to let it rise. For all of you who have made bread, how long does that take? I mean, is it minutes, hours, days? Okay. I don't know. But they're saying, so that you recognize and remember you left in a hurry. You'll make your bread, but you're not going to have time to let it rise. You're going to go ahead and cook the dough, and it's going to be unleavened bread. And leaven is going to come to symbolize sin, right? Because we're going to have a festival of unleavened bread. We read about that in the Gospels too, and eventually the two became kind of combined, the Passover followed by the unleavened bread. And you get all the leaven out of your house, symbolizing getting all sin out of my house. And for a week you'll only eat unleavened bread. Now the Jews, for practical reasons, what they would do for a lot of times is sell their leaven to a non-Jewish neighbor and then buy it back at the end of the week. They didn't throw it out because it was worth something, because normally they liked maybe some leaven in their bread. Like we do. If you eat, sliced white bread and whatever, that's all that's leavened. It's yeast. What is yeast? It's some sort of microorganism, right? Anyways, but you put that in there, and then the gas it produces makes the dough rise. There it is. All right. So you're going to eat it, and these bitter herbs, which is going to symbolize the difficulties that they suffer in the desert, he'll tell them. It says, do not eat any of it raw or boiled with water, but roasted, its head with its legs and its inner parts. You shall let none of it remain until the morning. Anything that remains until the morning you shall burn. At the end of Mass, if we have consecrated hosts left over, we don't throw them out. We don't burn them. But we consume them, or we put them in our tabernacle. I want you also to recognize how Catholic churches are also designed to replicate the tent of meeting. Our tabernacle represents the Ark of the Covenant. We have an altar on which we offer the bread of the presence. And then we also have that little lamp, don't we? That's always there beside the tabernacle. I just described to you what inside the tent of meeting looked like. But that's exactly why we design Catholic churches. All of them like that. Right? So we treat the consecrated bread, which has now become the body and blood of Jesus Christ. We don't, not with disrespect, we don't throw it away. Right? We save it or we consume it. And it's time to quit. In this manner you shall eat it. Your loins girded. That means they take their cloaks, which normally were down to the ground, and they tie them up, made them kind of like pants. That's what they would do if they're going to walk fast, right? So you don't trip yourself. I wouldn't go 10 steps dressed like that. Your loins girded, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. You shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. For I will pass through the land of Egypt that night, and I will strike all the firstborn of the land in Egypt, both man and beast. And on all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am Yahweh. I am the Lord. The blood shall be a sign for you, and upon the houses where you are, and when I see the blood, I will pass over. Passover, Pesach. That's also where we get Paschal, the Paschal mystery, which we usually say is the Eucharist. That is the Passover mystery, right? And I will strike the land of Egypt. He's going to tell the story again in a minute, next week. Next week in a minute, according to the priestly tradition, and we'll have a couple of other details. And so, but we're going to finish there for right now.
Jay?
Yes?
Just saying, 14 is where you get an
Right. Okay, so we're going to go over it again. Yeah, and anamnesis will be mentioned again. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Lord, these mysteries are not easy. At least I don't find them easy to really understand. But I know we are on holy ground here. And we're seeing here the ancient prediction of the New Covenant mysteries being outlined, fleshed out, prototyped. Help us, Lord, to appreciate what we read and bring it into our hearts, Lord, to make it real. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.